Hey guys, Ryan Gill here with Hunt Primitive, where we entertain, educate, and inspire. And how would you like to learn how to build your own wooden primitive arrow with nothing but Stone Age tools and Stone Age technology? We're going to get to doing that right now coming up. But before we do, I want to make sure you know that all these videos are sponsored by my website, HuntPrimitive, HuntPrimitive.com, for bows, arrows, atlatls, stone points, stone knives, anything you could need for primitive hunting. Please go check that out. Down in the description, you can check at any time and catch a link to head over to HuntPrimitive.com. And if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. So let's get on to the build. So in this video, we're going to be working on some arrows, and I'm going to be making some short hardwood arrows for my new Horseman model of bow. Go ahead and check down the link in the description if you'd like. You can see that new model of bow. We're shooting a little short bow. Good buddy Vaston Hall is hunting wild pigs on horseback with that bow. It's super cool stuff. Make sure you check out the stuff that we have coming up. I know that video's not out yet, but it should be soon. So anyway, I go out and I cut these hardwood shafts, and I'll choose various types of hardwood. These are primarily sparkleberry. I think I do have one cherry shaft in here. It might be in here, it might not be. I'm not really particular as long as it's a hardwood. So be it sparkleberry, cherry, plum, button bush. I mean, basically, if it's a hardwood and not willow, not pine, not anything like that, if it's nice and straight, I'm going to use it. But sparkleberry in Florida is my #1. Now, a lot of times in your western state, you're looking at like red osier dogwood. It's a really good choice. And arrowwood viburnum, I use a lot of that as well, especially up through the Appalachian Mountains. Arrowwood viburnum is one you want to look at. Very good stuff. Now, when I go out and I cut arrow shafts like these ones, this is a pretty light load for me. I just kind of went and got these just for the video. When I'm building a set of arrows, I go out and I cut anywhere from 15 to 20 of these. I will walk around and cover a lot of territory looking for arrow shafts. And I'm not looking for stuff that's necessarily straight. I mean, that one's actually about as straight as a guy could hope to get, but most of them are kind of like this. They're kind of all banana shaped out and got some crooks. But what I'm trying to avoid is anything that's got like a major crook in it or something that I can't take out. So like say you have like a major knot coming off to the one side, you come up here and it's got like a big dog leg in it. What I'm looking for is stuff that's smooth, that just needs straightening. And so that's what we have here. Like I said, I've only got all 5 shafts here. Normally I'll have something like 15 or 20 to kind of make it worth my time, because not every arrow shaft is going to make a perfect arrow. You're going to have to kind of take the cream of the crop, and some of them may turn out to be too light spined, some may be too heavy spined to work out. Sometimes with really Stone Age arrow sets where we're not using any modern implements, you're going to end up with some stuff, with some arrows that don't fly perfect. So if you make more of them, so say like I could make 15 arrows, you take the best 5, and those are the ones you're going to use. That's how some of this works with Stone Age technology, where we're excluding stuff like modern spine testers and grain scales and that kind of thing. So anyway, once you get your shafts, what I do is I leave them with the bark on for about a week. But every day we take these and straighten them by hand. You don't have to straighten them the first couple days. You can let them go just a couple days and it won't hurt anything, because otherwise you're just kind of beating your head against the wall a little bit. But if you wait 2 or 3 days, and these are about 2 or 3 days old since I cut them, I want you to work up and down the shaft and just start bumping them straight like I'm doing right now. I'm not using any heat. They're still green. I mean, these have green leaves on them when I cut them. So I'm working down, and after about 3 days of sitting and kind of drying, you can take a shaft that's relatively crooked and bump it, and it'll start staying kind of straight. Not super straight, but kind of straight. And we're going to set it aside when we're done with it. Don't try to get it perfect, but see, like this one's a little bit more crooked. Just going to work through and just kind of start bumping them straight. And then after a week, so as soon as we're done here and I'm explaining this to you, I'm going to shut the camera off and I'll see you in a week. Luckily for you, it'll be like 2 seconds. But anyway, here's one of those problem areas I was talking about. Comes straight up and there's kind of like a silly little dog leg. It's small enough I can probably work through it, but it's going to take a little bit more effort, and it won't stay right now because it's too green. But I'll work it a little bit every day. Just once a day, we're going to pick them up with the bark on, bump them straight, and towards the end of the week, they're actually going to start staying straight. Alright guys, we're back. That was a quick week, wasn't it? So we've gotten to where these are getting pretty straight. They're not absolutely perfect. There's still a little bit of moisture in them. But we're going to start off with a flake that looks like this. You see how it's got like this 90-degree break on the edge? These edges are perfect, absolutely perfect scrapers. Now we're not trying to use a little knife edge, like a knife, to get under it. What we're using is these sharp little 90-degree edges as a scraper. So I'm going to show you some of this here, how this works. They phenomenal little scrapers, and we're going to scrape all the bark off. You can still see when you scrape it, it's still green, it's not dried out. You have to remember that really properly made and strategically made primitive archery implements are not just made overnight. It takes a certain amount of time and dedication to build this stuff. And that's why the bow and arrow is not necessarily a very good survival weapon unless it's already pre-made. So if you have to go pre-make this stuff, you're going to end up with a lot of arrow shafts that are really flimsy, they don't fly very good, they don't stay straight because you're using green materials. But anyway, see how this is just scraping all of this off? So we're just using, again, that little 90-degree edge, and we're scraping all the bark off this shaft. It doesn't take very long. Now what we're going to do is we're not going to go through the whole set. I'm going to show you on one arrow. May not be the same arrow every time, but it'll essentially be the same build that we're working on, because I'm going to work through this set, but I'm just going to show you one. You don't need to see me make it 5 times over. But anyway, here we are. And I'm doing this in real time so you can see. I know it might be kind of boring after a while watching me scrape, but I want you to really get a grasp for the amount of work that goes into this stuff with Stone Age tools. Sometimes it's faster than you think it is, sometimes it's slower. Now the reason we do this while it's still relatively green is because all of this is going to peel easier while it's green. But if we take it off in the first week, or like in the first day or two, not after the first week, but in the first day or two, we're going to get a lot of drying checks or cracks all through these shafts. But if you wait about a week, it'll lose some moisture. You can start scraping that bark off. Now it's going to dry out much, much faster. Now, again, every day you need to go through and start making these adjustments in bumping these shafts straight. And if you hand straighten them, you can already see how much straighter this is now compared to when we first started, that they were pretty wonky. But if we work through and just bump these things straight a little bit every day, especially once the bark is off, really within just a day or two, we're going to have really straight arrow shafts that dried straight. And why that's important is if you take a shaft that has dried crooked, you can heat that and bend it straight. You absolutely can. But A, the bark is much harder to get off with stone tools. And then 2, you have to go gently heat every spot and try to bend it straight. And wood doesn't inherently like to stay super straight when it's heated. Unlike cane, where you can heat it and bend it, wood's gonna fight you a little bit. You're gonna have to kind of do that for 2 or 3 days to get them to where they no longer move. So if you do have to make heat corrections on these, which is possible, sometimes you'll bump all the way through a whole bunch of shafts, set them up for a while, come back and they've moved on you. And if you have to apply heat to straighten them, you're gonna apply the heat, you're gonna straighten it, it's gonna look great. Make sure you set it up somewhere, because you'll come back tomorrow and it could have warped back a little bit. But once you've gone through the process of reheating and bumping everything straight, and they're very straight and they've stayed straight for a couple days, then you're good to go. But the reason that I like to straighten them as they dry is I'm going through that process now. I don't have to apply heat to these to straighten them. I'm not saying I never will. There's inevitably going to be 2 or 3 that have some little crook that I need to take out, And at that point, and I'm not even going to really show it to you, you've seen me do it enough in other videos, we'll have a fire, and I don't put it right in the fire. I don't want to burn it and scorch it, but we're just going to get it remotely close to the fire till it gets hot, and then we can bend it straight. So anyway, what we have right here, aside from the curve right at the end, which I don't care, we're going to cut that off anyway, same with up here. That's why I leave a little bit extra, and really these arrows are only going to be about, you know, this long or so in comparison, so we're going to trim them on either end. But we're left with, throughout the center, actually a really nice straight shaft already. And within another day or two, when this is really good and dry, it's going to stay super straight. They're going to dry much faster with the bark off. But we really won't build the arrow for another week or two yet. What we want to be able to do to test them, and this is very important, when these are all said and done, sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it's shorter, depends on your humidity level, is when you have a shaft and it's staying straight, if you can walk up to it and bend it like this and it stays bent, like it, now this put a gentle bend in it, it's not dry yet. You want to be able to have a shaft that's straight that you can walk up to, bend it, and it'll go right back to being straight. Then you know that your shafts are dry and ready to make an arrow out of. So now we're going to go ahead and fast forward again, and fast forward to whatever amount of time it's going to take until these are perfectly straight and we're ready to actually make arrows out of them. Okay, and we're back, and it's been actually quite a bit of time, but here's our shaft. It's completely dry. It's been a couple weeks, and you can see it's actually pretty straight, except for right along the edges, or right along the ends. A lot of times these we can just cut off, and you can figure out kind of what length you're going with. And I'm going to end up knocking some of this off on the ends because we want it a little bit shorter anyway, because it's for that horse bow. But I want to point out one little thing that sometimes I forget to do. The little end, you always have a naturally tapered shaft. You have a bigger end that's towards the base when the stock grows naturally. The big end is the side that the point goes on. The little end is what the fletchings and then the string knock goes on. So keep that in mind. Now, we've got a lot of stuff we're kind of going to go over. This is one of my bison skinner knives, which are available at HuntPrimitive. You're going to see me working with this quite a bit. Sometimes when I sell these, you can use just one side for, say, woodworking, the other side for flesh, because you're going to look at two different types of edges. One that has more serrations and very sharp that you're going to use on flesh, one that has low serrations that you use for sawing wood. So either pick a side and stick with that material on one side, or have two. Obviously I make these things, so I just have a whole bison skinner that I just devote to using on wood for sawing and grinding stuff in. But just a reminder that all this stuff is, of course, completely sponsored by my website, huntprimitive.com. Please check it out, where you can buy bows, arrows, atlatls, flint knives, stone points, basically anything you could possibly need for Stone Age hunting and animal preparation, you'll find right there. So, but anyway, we're going to use that to kind of just scar along the edge and snap this off and cut in the nocks, and we'll move on to that. But I have to kind of preface a little bit of this with some of the stuff that I'm working with here, because the shaft is very straight because we straightened it as it dried. We don't need to make any heat corrections. If it does not stay straight and you need to make heat corrections, obviously you build a fire. But unlike cane, where it's kind of okay to scorch it, if you scorch the wood, it won't heat the inside of the wood properly. This is really important. Okay, so if you're going to heat a wood shaft, you need to keep it, say if my hand is the fire, you need to keep it off. Don't put it right into it. Put it off to the side until it gets really hot, too hot to touch, but it doesn't scorch and turn the wood brown. Then you can bend it, because if it does that, a lot of times the outside seems like it's really hot, but the inside isn't always hot. And when you bend it in a couple of days, it'll warp right back to the way it was. So I think, I'm not even positive on this, but I'm pretty sure that Ishi, if you're not familiar with who that is, then just do a little Google search. I-S-H-I is how you spell it. And I believe that he was one that mentioned that if you scorch your wood arrow shafts, that it shows bad form. And that I'll kind of agree with, but cane is a totally different story. So again, we're working with hardwood here today. So Primitive archery and primitive living in general is about utilizing a lot of different things. This is our workbench, okay? So this is just a piece of heart pine that I picked up just walking around the woods. And it's like when you see something that you know you can use, you pick it up and you save it for later. And this is something that I use as just a handheld workbench. I can sit it down, I can cut into this, I can grind into it, I can do a lot of things because it's got a relatively flat top and it's a very dense wood. But again, primitive skills are about reusing a lot of materials that where nothing really goes to waste. So here's a tinder bundle that is made from bow shavings, and you save all of this stuff because everything that you produce is a byproduct that you can use for something else. That's all very anthropologically important. So bow shaving stuff, we're going to save all of this for later, and I'm going to show you something about that. But when you work with like this workbench, this wooden workbench, what happens over time is you get a lot of these cuts in this, and the surface becomes very rough and very uneven. And this is something that I do fairly often, is you can take a wood flake and just scrape. And over time, not only is it going to flatten out your table, but also what we're doing is we are creating a nice new smooth surface, and at the same time we're making a beautiful little amount of like fat wood lighter tinder. So you could set that right down in the middle of your tinder bundle, because if you know anything about fat wood, it burns exceptionally well. So if you have yourself a little workbench like this, little primitive workbench, just don't be afraid to scratch all of the knife barks out once in a while, because if you work with this, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. You'll get these long gouges and you'll be trying to cut something, and instead of following the line you want to cut, your flint tool will go down in the wood and start following that old line. So just go ahead and scrape that thing off, but then again, don't waste anything. Take the little fat wood stuff, put it right in your tinder bundle, because we're going to need that in a minute when we're burning fletchings. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a heads up on that before I show you anything else. But now we're going to work with a bunch of turkey fletchings that I have right here, and we're going to make some fletchings. Once the fletchings are done, then we will show you some of the cutting and the knock and that kind of stuff. But it doesn't matter what order you do things in, it just matters essentially that you do it. Now, normally I'm doing this much lower on the ground, but I want you to be able to see it. So we're going to take our feather, and there is on the inside of the feather, one more quick note too. I assume everybody knows this stuff, but I know not everybody does. When you're starting off with your fletching, it doesn't matter if you use the feathers from the left or the right side of the wing. The important thing is that you use them all from the same side. So don't take two feathers from one side and then one feather from the other, because they won't twist around the shaft. They won't helical properly. So take them all from the left or all from the right. But otherwise it doesn't matter. But now there's also kind of a it's not a ridge, it's an inverted ridge. It's a groove that runs all the way down the inside of the feather. And what we're going to do is we're going to just go ahead and hold this on our workbench, and we take our flint knife, and you can do this with a flake as well, but since I've got the knife here, that's what I'm going to do. We're going to put the tip of the knife, if you can see it, right inside this groove. That's what we're doing right now. So we're going to stick it right down in that groove on our little portable workbench. And we're not trying to cut through it all in one shot. What we're doing is we're scoring it all the way down, just like this. And it takes 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 passes, depending on how well you do it. But you're going to know, because it's going to start to split. And then it starts to split, and you can essentially pop it right out. Okay, now what we have here is a piece of river cane. And this piece of river cane was obviously a round tube at one point in time, and we stuck a little stone flake in here and tapped it down and we split it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take either side of this, typically up towards the top works a little bit better, and we're going to pinch it to where the quill sticks up above. I'm looking for all my tools here, so hang with me a second. To where the quill sticks up above the cane and holds it rather securely. Then we're just going to take a simple stone flake. You don't want necessarily a knife edge. What you want is, and it's not blunt, but it's more of a steep edge, so I don't know if you can really see that. I know you can't hear a whole lot. But there's a really steep knife edge here, and that's great for cutting some things, but then this side's a little bit steeper. But anyway, we're going to take this and we're going to just scrape this shaft, or this shaft, this, listen to me talking about stuff all wrong. We're going to scrape the quill. Now if the quill is a little bit thick, then you can take the knife edge of your flake, and this is just a flint flake or a chert flake, and we can cut it. Just be careful you don't get your fingers. That's another reason it helps to have the little cane pieces, if you don't drop them like I just did. There you go. And we can use this to kind of whittle away the quill. And this stuff just takes a little bit of time. That's all it is. None of the Stone Age primitive archery stuff is something you're going to accomplish in like 2 minutes. This is all a huge allocation of time. But you have to remember that the people that did this had enormous amounts of time to perfect their gear. There's no reason to rush through any of this process. So every now and then you just got to keep realigning, scrape all that down. Then once we've got that kind of scraped down where it's nice and flat and it's also kind of thin, then decide what length you want these to be at. And take our workbench again, and I'm going to take just a little off the tip, and I'm just taking a sharp edge of the stone flake and I'm rocking it back and forth, as you can see. And typically you can cut it, and if it doesn't cut, then you can scrape it. Figure out what length you want. If you don't want to measure it, just kind of eyeball something that looks pretty good. That's what I like to do. Keep your eye on the spot and just saw through it. Just like that. Okay, clean the feathers up. And I'm going to do this to the other two shafts, but you don't need to, or I keep saying shafts, that's just silliness. The other two fletchings. I don't know why my mind keeps getting mixed up on that. But anyway, I'm going to do this same thing to the other two fletchings, and then we're going to move on to actually burning the fletchings into shape, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Now that we've got all our fletchings cut, what we're going to do is we're going to come right here at the base, where all the veins of the feather face that way. We're going to come down here about 1/4 of an inch or so, and just yank those pieces off right there. Okay, and then on this side, we're going to set that right back down on our workbench that we have here. I'm going to take a stone flake, and we're just going to take the sharp edge, cut just a little bit, and again another 1/4 inch or so. See if you can see what that looks like right there. Okay, so all this is something that we can wrap sinew around front and the back of the fletching. So we're going to go ahead and do that quick on all 3 of these. So getting your fletchings prepared is really, really important, because the last thing you want to do is have a fire going and having hot pitch, and then all of a sudden realize, oh, I still have to do my other fletchings. Okay, so you're going to take every single one of these fletchings and get them ready right now. There we go. So these are all ready. Now we're going to build a little bit of a fire. So remember I told you before, we have our tinder bundle over here. I'm just going to slide off to the side, make a little primitive fire for you. Then we'll show you how to burn these fletchings. I'm going to show you here real fast about, we wanted to shorten this down just about 1 inch or so. And so I wanted to show you out the back up so you can see it really well. We're just going to take our flint knife. Remember, you use this stuff fairly gingerly. You don't force your way through it. But what we're doing is we're going to score. We can go back and forth. But the idea isn't to just sit there and saw like a modern saw all the way through. What we're doing is we're scoring evenly all the way around the shaft. And it doesn't take much, just a couple swipes. A lot of times I like to pull back towards myself. It seems like the tool always works better when you pull rather than push. I'm just going to work all the way around. Just like that. Camera focus on it here quick. So we scored it all the way around, and then it's just as simple as popping it right off. That's pretty much it. Now, if you have another rock, which I do, hang tight here 1 second. You can just take just kind of flatten and then round those edges right off. It doesn't take any special rock to do that. Not a problem at all. Now, I'm going to go ahead. I'm still working here with our little workbench. I'm going to take our knife. I'm going to start cutting in a knock. Whether you go towards yourself or away from yourself, doesn't matter. The idea is, don't force it. And I don't necessarily cut straight in. I turn the knife. This is exaggerated. But I turn the knife like this as I cut because it's going to widen out my string knock ever so slightly. It doesn't take very much, so you do one side, then you flip it over, make sure it's facing directly down, and you do the other side to meet it. But it always helps if you use a platform like this here, Primitive Workbench, to cut against. Because if you're trying to do this freehand, it's bouncing around. But you can pin this right against the ground, and you have a little bit of leverage to work with. Now, you don't have to get absolutely crazy with this, but you want it to go in far enough that your string is going to seat on it properly. So keep sliding back and forth. And then, once you think you're in pretty far, which we are here, grabbing more tools. Get the camera to focus on that. Okay. We're going to take a thin-edged flake, and we're going to go in here and we're going to whittle just the little knife edge kind of. So if we go in from both sides, it kind of makes a peak in the middle. And we're going to use that peak to our advantage later. But as of right now on the string knock, all we want to do is kind of eat that away a little bit. Pretty much just like that. Perfect. Now, take kind of a just see the edge of this flake. See how it's kind of almost broke, almost at a 90 degree up here? That gives you better geometry for scraping. Everybody always wants to scrape with the little knife edge side, but the knife edge side doesn't give you as good a wood peeling capabilities, believe it or not, with these sharp 90 degree bends. But anyway, use those. Kind of scrape the edges off, and then you take your rock again. Just round all of this in. And pretty much just work it as much as you want for as pretty as you want it to be. No sense in being in a rush on any of this, just do it right, make sure it fits. And another little tip too that I would have, I don't really need to do it because I do so many of these, I already kind of know what to even look for, but bring your bow out while you're doing this and test fit the knock on your bowstring to see how it fits. And if it's too tight, you can whittle a little bit out. And if it's too loose, here's another little fun trick. If it's too loose, either cut it in a little bit further and make it get more narrow as it goes, or put this, knock gently over the fire, and then as it's nice and warm, pinch it shut a little bit, and that'll make your knock a little bit tighter fitting on the string. But that is probably, get the camera to focus on that a little bit, that's probably just about perfect. So now let's go ahead and move on to the fire. We'll burn our fletchings, and we'll also apply them with pine pitch. Alright, we're going to work with one of these flint flakes here a second. I know you've a lot of times seen me use a leaf to catch a coal, but I like to bury a flint flake in there. I'm starting to use these now because I always have a lot of flint flakes lying around, and they don't flex as much as a leaf. So it's like, well, if you've kind of got one and you're using it for a tool anyway, clean it up really well, and then see what we can do to spin up a coal. One of the things I like to emphasize here is don't be in a rush to blow this into a flame. It's just building up heat. So just get all your stuff kind of out of the way, and you'll know it gets hotter and hotter just as you hold it. Get all my sticks ready, got my tinder ready. Alright, now take a stick and lay it right in. That one's not a very good one because it's already pretty hot. Grab a new one. Lay just the tip right in the fire, because we just want that tip to catch on fire. We're going to take our little split pieces of river cane, and we're going to take the quill and put that quill right at the top of the cane. Just like that. Now squish it down so the only thing sticking out is the feather on the opposite side. There we go. You can see how that looks. So then, once that's pinched in, take a little bit of time to make sure it's right. You're going to pinch this hard, and then you're going to take the stick that's on fire and just let it burn right up the edge. Blow it out once in a while if it gets a little out of control. And take your time. Don't burn yourself all up. Just burn it right to the edge of the river cane. Just like that. Sometimes it just takes a second to get it all. Then you take your flint flake while you're still pinching it and rake up all the burned little booger pieces. What we have here, I'll show you a little bit more up close. When I take it out, is a very nice burnt arrow fletching. Isn't that neat? That's really neat. So let's go ahead and we're going to do that. Stick my stick back in there. And this time I'll try to come to you so you can see it a little bit closer up. Try to put it here so you can kind of see what's going on a little bit. Burn that right up. Try not to get your fingers, but if you burn your fingers, it just means you're doing a good job. Whew, yeah, getting me a bit. That's how you get tough fingers. There, perfect. Then take your flake, run it right up, pull it out. And one more beautiful fletching. So go ahead and do the other one. We'll have all three set, ready to go, and then we'll glue them on. Okay, we got all our fletchings done, and we got our arrow, and now this is a primitive glue stick that we're going to use. I'll hold that so you can see, and this is pine pitch is what this is. Pine resin, charcoal, and beeswax mixed together. I take a stick, stick it in a clay pot or a shell that I cooked all this stuff up in, and there's lots of different videos on that. I don't have one specifically to send you to, although I should. But anyway, I keep adding it onto the stick, and then I keep working it out with my fingers. I'll lick my fingers and keep squishing it out until I have this big, long, beautiful glue stick. The actual stick itself probably only comes up to here. All the rest of this is just glue. But I want to show you how we use this. Now we're going to take our arrow, and our knock is cut in, and I just broke my glue stick. That's kind of funny, but that's not a big deal. We're just going to use this end. Then I'll stick it back together later. Like I said, it's just kind of made of glue. But anyway, our knock runs, if our knock runs horizontal, then the first fletching that we want to put on, we want to do perpendicular, and this will be the cock feather, the one that sticks out while it's on the bowstring. Now it's not super important, but that's kind of a good rule of thumb to go by. So now what I want to do is, I don't want to get this shaft really hot because it'll warp on me, but what I want to do is take, especially if it's cool out, it doesn't take long, run it through the fire. I still have the fire here going next to me. I can throw a couple more sticks on it quick though. And I just don't want to shock the pitch when it hits the wood if you got cold wood, especially if it's cold out. So just kind of warm the shaft. Now we got to do this quick. If it's, you got to check to make sure it's not warping, which mine's not. So it's a little bit warm, keep it close. We got to do these quick. We got to do all three quick as we can, okay? Remember what I told you about the orientation of the first one. Now what we're going to do is take our primitive glue stick, and we stick it right in the fire and get it melting pitch. You can see how flustered I get when I have to rush. Okay, and we're going to take it and we're going to stick it right down on that arrow shaft. Now we're going to put a little bit of helical in it, and I know this takes practice. It seems like it would be really simple, and I can't show you up close because I'm fighting the clock as well. But what you want to do is make sure, and I'm going to show you afterwards, so hang tight. And if you lick your fingers while you hold it down, it'll help keep your fingers from sticking to it. There's no sense in rushing this, so I don't want to rush through it just to show you and then it looks like a bad job, so that would just be silly. You'll understand what I'm talking about with licking your fingers, because the pitch won't stick to your fingers if you lick it, and you'll be able to manipulate this feather around. But you want to make sure that the quill is really well stuck down to the shaft while the pitch, see it stuck my finger to it? While the pitch is still soft. Look through this one. Be patient with me, I'm sorry. Stone Age stuff doesn't happen over in a second. And so much for nice Stone Age video with the airplanes going by during the key moments, right? Stone Age inspired, right? Okay, so here we are. We're looking, you can see that there's a little bit of helical in this, and what I mean by helical is the inside of the feather starts facing, well, it starts cupping. So this way when it hits the air, it's going to spin, and we're going to do all of these with the same helical. Hopefully you know what helical are, but that's what we're doing, is we're adding this, a little bit of helical into these one at a time. Now as they dry. Now oddly enough, that shaft, you don't want it, I got it a little bit too hot, so I had to hang on to it a little bit too long. But as long as it's not cold, that's the important part. So then we're going to heat up our pitch, apply glue to our next, and if you get to where if you do kind of freak out and you don't get it on in time, you can always hold your feather close to the coals down here, and that will help keep your pitch a little softer. But if you stick it right in the fire, it's just going to burn your feather up, so don't do that. I'll lick your fingers so they don't stick. And it's going to take a little bit of practice. I mean, I'm not going to lie, I probably make it kind of look easy. It's going to take a little bit of practice to get your spacing correct. I've done, I'm going to say, a conservative thousands of arrows over a period of time. And eventually you kind of know what you're looking for. But what you can do is take the other one dry and set right up in there with it. And that'll help you align the second one if it needs aligned, which this one's good. So go ahead, heat up our pitch down here in our fire, and wipe it right on the base of the quill, just like that. Perfect. Don't set your pine pitch down in the sand. Make sure it's on a piece of wood or rock or something like that. And lay all this in. Again, don't forget to lick your fingers so it doesn't stick. But you want to push all of the quill down. Make sure it really squishes that pitch in well. And while it's still hot, you can still kind of manipulate these around. And like I said, if you make a mistake, it's going to take a little bit of time. You can't just stick it in the fire because it's going to make your feathers all curl up and burn. But if you just get it relatively close, it will heat up enough. But now you should be able to get the camera to focus on it. You should be able to say we've actually got a pretty good spacing. We've got nice helical. I think that is absolutely perfect. And you can change your fletching design a little bit just simply by how you burn them in. I kind of like these ones for my Stone Age arrows, just because they're homogeneous. They're the same width from one end to the other. In fact, when we do these, they're actually a little bit wider at the bottom, but that doesn't really matter. I'm not terribly concerned. But now you can take kind of like these little edges. If one is up higher than the other, go ahead and break the other two to match that one, pulling those pieces off. Okay, so now we're going to let this cool, and I'll get away from that fire so you can see up close how I'm going to wrap these up with Sinew. But go ahead and just set this up, let it cool for 5 or 10 minutes, and you'll be ready to go. Alright, we're going to take a piece of deer sinew, and that's what this is, backstrap deer sinew. Put it in your mouth and wet it up. And the reason I say to even use your mouth and chew on it, it gets really soft and pliable, even more so than if you just soak it in water. If you soak it in water, it's pliable and it works. But if you actually chew on the stuff and your saliva helps to break down some of the natural glues, you're going to notice a huge difference in the quality of the sinew between chewing and soaking. Now, while I'm chewing this, I have a little bit of coal left, so I'm going to take my primitive glue stick that stuck to my other thing. I'll have to scrape that off in a second, but my primitive glue stick here that I broke while I'm chewing this, I'm just going to reheat this over the fire because essentially it's primitive hot melt glue. So hang with me here. It's going to take about 3, 2, 1. That should be good. And now I can stick that right back together. Hook your fingers. See how easy that was? Alright. So now our glue stick's back together. You're just going to drop this stuff in and break it. But it's glue, so you can just stick it right back together. Easy peasy. Now, while I wasted your time doing that, I got that glue about, or that sinew about chewed up, but I'm going to go ahead and grab another piece while I'm at it. I'm going to work on that while I'm working with this one. And just carefully untangle it. And grab our arrow. And this is actually the thinner piece of the two, so I'm going to use it down towards this end. And we're just going to wrap it to hold it on. Now, of course, I'm going to show you this just to undo it and re-show you. But there's these little shoulders from the quills that stick up, and a lot of people are going to wrap these, and that kind of stuff can catch your hand or the bow and send your arrows a little bit errant. So take this back off, put that stuff back in your mouth, and take a little flint flake, find a little razor edge, which I have one here, and I just want you to shave those down and bevel them right into the shaft itself. And if you did a good job with your pitch, your fletchings should stick. And I say that just as I knocked one loose. So now's a good time to show you that. Yeah, I knocked that one a little bit loose. It's fine, it's not a big deal. Take our primitive glue stick, stick it back over in the coals. Doesn't take but just a second. We're gonna run it, pick this up just a little bit and run it right along the inside of that shaft. And then stick it right back down. And that should be perfect. So if you make a mistake, just remember, don't lose your mind. Just heat it back up and stick it. Now in the future, if you leave these out in the direct sunlight and it's warm, your fletchings are going to detach. Okay? That's all part of Stone Age technology stuff, is you have to be situationally aware of where you're leaving all your stuff at. You don't leave it in direct sunlight. Things can get too dry, things can get hot and let go with your pitch. So always keep your stuff, no matter what you're doing, always keep it in a shady location. We very rarely, unless we're looking for something too dry or to get hot, we don't leave it in direct sunlight any longer than need be. I'm not saying that you can't walk around and hunt in the sunlight, because that's not the case. But if you like set this down on the ground or on a rock and walk away and come back like 3 hours later, the stuff's going to be melted and your pitch is going to pop loose from your feathers in your shaft. So, and it doesn't matter if you use hide glue or pine pitch or whatever. If you subject it to a lot of direct UV, it's going to release your glue. Okay, now we got this bottom side done. What we're going to do is we have to wrap right below the nock. That has to happen, or else we'll split the arrow shaft. So I do about 2 or 3 good wraps right below the nock. I think I said arrow shaft, but I meant arrow nock. And then you can just kind of work this down all the way around until you can get right to these other little pieces of the quill that we left stick out. Wrap those. Now if you chewed this stuff, chewed the sinew, you will have already noticed that there is a nice natural glue sticky property to it. If you soak it in water, it doesn't have as sticky of properties, but you can spin this stuff and lay it. You don't have to tie a knot, just lay it on itself and it will actually dry and it will stay just like that. Now, one of the other little tricks that I like to do is once it's dry, not right now, so I'm not going to even show you doing it, take your primitive glue stick and right kind of at just the one edge that you glued down. If you do it while it's wet, it's not going to stick. But wait till it's dry, come back, take a tiny smear of pitch glue and put right over top of that fold up. That way, if it does absorb a little bit of moisture, hits some, some dew or something like that, it doesn't soften up and it won't lift back up on you. So this is kind of a waterproofing agent as well. So you can take a little bit of that and you can just smear with your finger right around there. But essentially, now we have a fletched arrow that is done actually quite beautifully. Alright, so you can shoot it with a blunt end on it, but if you scrape for a little bit, and you can switch back and forth and just grind on a rock, and you'll notice that if you grind for a while, you'll kind of run it smooth and it starts to polish it almost a little bit too much. And that's when you can take your flint flake again and scrape on it like this. And that almost makes like these little toothing ridges, and then it'll grind better again. But once you kind of get a feel for that, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But once you've grind all that off, it'll just polish it. So give that a try and see if it doesn't sharpen the end up for you a little bit. Alright, you start ending up with something that looks a little bit more like that. It doesn't even have to be that sharp. It doesn't take very long at all, but now you can see we've got a really nice, it's a straight hardwood short arrow, and we'll go out and test shoot that and see how it does. Alright, we're just going to do a couple little quick test shots. Make sure it flies good. If it flies good without a point, we'll put a little small Edwards point on it. It shouldn't affect the flight very much. And looks like we're good to go. Alright, well, we are officially ready to put our stone point on. This is an Edwards point that I made that is going to specifically fit right here on our Stone Age built arrow. Now, I did not show you building the point because that's a whole different video all on its own. And if you check down in the description, it'll be very clearly labeled to where you can go watch me make this Edwards style stone point for big game hunting. And we're going to attach it on to the end of the arrow. And one of the things I want to really point out, let it focus here. Now, this is asymmetrical because in the building process I kind of snapped that off a little bit, and that's alright. A lot of the originals have asymmetrical bottoms, and that's kind of for probably the same exact reasons that mine does, is because I kind of goofed up and knocked it off. But it's not the end of the world, it's just a hafting base. And the important thing to really point out here is the base is concave. Okay, it pitches in the middle. And I'm not going to show you cutting the notch. We already did it. I'm not showing you cutting the notch for the point that goes into the end of the arrow because it's the same process that we used to cut in the nock end for the arrow, where we take the bison skinner knife, stone flake, whatever, and we're sawing one direction this way, and then we can spin it and saw the other direction this way. Now, what that makes, if you remember, and we go back to that video earlier in this clip where I'm doing this, it creates a peak in the middle. So if you're looking like here's the whole arrow shaft, and then you cut in this way and you cut in this way, it makes on the inside of your notch, it makes a peak because the knife doesn't really fit down in the notch this way. It's going this way, and then we spin it around and then it goes this way, but it doesn't really fit this way. So what happens is on the inside, what you're kind of looking at is it makes a little bit of a peak on the inside, up and down. And now, oddly enough, oh, that makes a little bit of perfect sense, especially when it comes to the experimental archaeology practical application, is the concave base of our Edwards point fits perfectly right down on that little peak that we cut in. And so even if we, well, sometimes they fit better one way. That's a little trick too, just so you know. Sometimes when you cut it in, when you test fit it, it fits better one way and it does the other. So pull it out, stick it in the other way. I'll test fit it here quick. And right about, make sure you test fit it so where it spins really good. So that spins pretty good. We're going to make it a little bit better yet than that, and that's actually good enough. But that peak that's on the inside that we cut with the stone knife fits the concave base of the Edwards point perfectly. And it's kind of the same thing too with the Dalton knives, and a lot of things have concave bases. A lot of times you can tell how the point itself is hafted by looking at the base of the point. So something that's got a concave base, typically it's probably a ground-in style. Something that's a flat base, maybe a snap style of hafting. And that's a totally different subject for a totally different day. But anyway, I'm going to set my point aside, and whenever you cut this notch in, remember I want you to take a rock and really file these edges down the ends. And there's a specific reason for that, and that is because you do not want a rough transition between your point and your shaft. Too many times what I see, camera focus on it, is when the point's in here, these shoulders on either side stick out and when you put your point in there, and if you run your fingers down over top of the point, you'll hit these shoulders, and that'll actually stop penetration. So that we do not want. So go ahead and grind that down. I'm going to test fit the point on because I kind of want to show that to you again. And we can always adjust it a little bit. So either use a stone flake or an abrading rock or something to work that down. And that's exactly what we're looking at there. So I want you to be able to take your two fingers, kind of pinch them together fairly tight, and run it down through. If it slides kind of right over the top of it, then it's pretty good. Now, of course, when we take a little bit of pitch, we're gonna blend that in so it's even smoother. But if you hit it and it kind of stops or wants to, you have to kind of push to get it through, and you can feel your fingers go over those shoulders. They need ground down because you don't want any sort of abrupt shoulders in your transition, or else it's just gonna simply take the penetrative qualities away from your arrow. So anyway, everything's test fit. The hafting transition is smoothed down, so we're going to take the point out. I'm going to set it off to the side, and definitely make sure that you go back over and watch me make that point with Stone Age tools. But we're going to take, we've kind of got our fire going off to the side here a little bit. It's mostly just coals at this point, but we're going to heat the rock up ever so slightly because we don't want to take a cold rock and put hot pitch on it because it'll shock the pitch and it won't make it stick very good. So once you kind of heat the point up and it starts feeling a little bit hot, we'll set that back down. And then same thing kind of with your wood shaft. We just want to gently warm it before we take our primitive glue stick, and we're going to stick that right in the kind of by the fire and coals as well, and then just wipe a little bit of pitch right down in that haft. Be perfect. Okay, and then same thing, we'll just take the point back and just make sure it's got a little bit of heat on it. Take our hot pitch glue, and then we're going to go ahead and put just a little smear of pitch glue on that as well. Then take both components, put them back over kind of around your fire, and you don't want it hot and runny, you just don't want it crazy. Whoop, now that stinks. Now I got dirt in it. So just wipe that off. If you drop it, it's not the end of the world. I've certainly done that a time or three. Whew, rock's actually pretty hot. Get some more pitch and put on it. You don't want to have a bunch of grass and glue and everything else in there. Okay, we're going to slide it together just like this. Work it around to where it fits good. And then just go ahead and spin test it. Spin it between your fingers, and you'll know immediately if it spins true or not just by watching the tip. And as soon as I get it, because we are fighting the clock, as soon as I get it to where I'm pretty happy with it, make sure it's always seated all the way down in the bottom too. Lick your finger, and then just you can kind of rub all this soft pitch right into that transition. Pick off some of the leftover here and get rid of it. And then, of course, realign your point. It's probably just about perfect, I'd say. See, she's spinning pretty good. I mean a teeny tiny skosh off, but that would never hurt anything, I don't think. Very, very, very close. It's pretty darn good right there. I think I'll accept that. So, again, go ahead, take your finger, wet it, and then you can just kind of rub this pitch smooth. Spin test it one more time to make sure it's looking pretty good, which it is. And then once this dries, which it's already getting kind of cool, and by dry I mean cool down, you should be able to, again, take your fingers, kind of take your hand like this, squeeze your fingers together pretty hard, and slide it right in between your two fingers, and then push through. And if it catches and wants to separate your fingers really hard, or just wants to push your hand back, then you know the transition is too rough. If it slides right through when you're squeezing your fingers, then you know it's a pretty good transition. So that's a nice little test to run. So now we got that glued in there, transition smoothed out. So we're going to go ahead and take another piece of deer sinew and go ahead and chew that up a second. And just want to make sure, hang out here till the very end because we have a little sneak peek of a future project we're going to be publishing with arrows and such, just like this. And we're almost done. We're almost done with this whole build. So make sure you hang out to see that little sneak peek. But hopefully you've stuck with me the whole time watching us go through this whole process of building this Stone Age arrow from scratch. I know it's been quite a journey. So well worth it, I think. Okay. Same process as we did when we wrapped it. We're gonna just smooth everything out, make sure it's not twisted all up or tangled. Just gonna lay it in. And when I spin this, and this is not terribly important, but I always kind of start behind the point and just hold it down with my finger, and then I go up around the point. And I kind of do a, well, if I don't drop it, I like to do a figure 8 around the point, and then once I figure 8, then I do another one straight over the top, kind of perpendicular to the shaft, and then back through, and then wrap behind it. Now, the direction that you wrap is not important. The pattern that you wrap is not important. You don't have to do the straight across. The idea of the sinew wrap in general is not so much to hold the point in during impact. That's what the pitch glue is for. The sinew keeps it so where when if and when the point gets knocked loose, it doesn't completely fall out. So if you break the pitch glue loose after impact, it could be loose in there, but the sinew will retain it so you can use it again later. And then also you wrap down below the stone point. This is about, there's probably between 3/8 of an inch and a half inch worth of sinew wrapped below the stone point. And that's probably about the minimum you want. You can get by with a little less. I've done plenty that have just a teeny bit of wrapping. But you got to figure, if you hit something like bone, you don't want it to jam this point back and actually split your shaft. And it doesn't take a lot. You don't have to wrap way down. That's unnecessary. I've hit plenty of bones in the past with about that much sinew on it, and it holds it perfectly in there without splitting the shaft. So here we are, all finished up. We're going to let this dry, and this thing is absolutely ready to hunt. You can see we're nice and straight. We've got our fletching on here, which is phenomenal. We watched the arrow shoot. We test shot it several times. You only saw me shoot it probably once or twice. Flies really good. We mounted up our heat treated Edwards point that we made with all antler tools. Please go check in the description, go watch the video on that. But that's it. Thanks for sticking with me. And be sure to check out, again, HuntPrimitive.com. That is my business, and my business sponsors all of these videos that I do. So HuntPrimitive.com to buy bows, arrows, atlatls, stone points, anything that you could possibly need. Flint knapping supplies, everything for primitive hunting you'll find at HuntPrimitive.com. So thanks for following along. I know it's been a long adventure, but I appreciate you sticking with me, and we will catch you on the next adventure.